So it's funny, we've already done a video on the beginning of the process, how you get started, but quite a few subscribers have got in touch and said, could we do something about the end of the process? How do you know when a track's finished? Yes, so how do you know when a track's finished? How do you know when you've got to that point where you say, that's it, I'm done, I've finished? That doesn't mean you couldn't do more stuff. It doesn't mean that it's not possible to do more stuff. It's just that you've decided not to. This is a really important thing. You know, the ancient Egyptians could have kept on smoothing out their triangles for their pyramids forever. Or, you know, a person turning a leg of a old wooden chair could make it perfectly, completely cylindrical, and spend, you know, years trying to make this perfect cylinder for a chair leg. But they don't. They actually say, no, that's it, I've finished, I've moved on. And as a musician, that's something that you have to do. Is your track already finished? Are its imperfections actually in some way a strength? So I do want to dispel this myth that whatever the artist says about their track is always right. I think sometimes the artist isn't the best placed person to say whether their track is finished or whether it's any good. They're so stuck in the nitty-gritty of the making that they've maybe haven't got perspective.
Yes, definitely. Because when I'm working on it in the moment, it's really easy to want to edit every single note, want to edit every single chord and voicing and melody, say, oh, maybe this can be better, blah, 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 blah.
I mean, maybe there's other things going on. Maybe they haven't slept enough. Maybe they haven't had enough of a break. Maybe their ego is too involved in the project. Maybe they're so caught up in what they thought the track was going to be that they lose sight of what it actually is. So we're going to be discussing lots and lots of methods for getting a sense of perspective, for finding a way of hearing your track a bit more like a listener hears it rather than a maker. And that will enable you to say, that's it, I'm done. There's a track by the Beatles called Tomorrow Never Knows, which John Lennon famously thought was not quite right. He had this big vision of what it was going to be like, of these Himalayan monks singing on top of a mountain, and never quite worked for him as far as he was concerned. It was, it was an unfinished experiment that didn't quite work. As far as everyone else is concerned, it's a brilliant track. I mean, I really recommend you listen to it. It's very influential. You'll hear the drums sampled and other bits of the track sampled on a track by the Chemical Brothers. One of their most influential tracks, in fact, was, a problem for the person that wrote it. And that's just not anything that we should worry about. Adele's Easy on Me, there's an out-of-tune note on that if you listen. But somehow it works. It's fine. It doesn't need fixing. Just because it's not perfect doesn't mean that you have to keep working on it.
100%. Oh my gosh, so many artists are perfectionists, and if we let that perfectionism get the best of us, then there would be zero music in the world. It's rare that something feels like it's truly arrived to that final place. Because there is always, at the end of the day, there's always something that could be a little better. There's always a hypothetical chord that could be changed or a lyric that could be changed.
There's a Japanese concept called wabi-sabi, which is the things that are too perfect don't really feel right. And so you just leave a wooden thing slightly unsanded in one place, or the paint's just slightly sort of unfinished somewhere. And maybe you've experienced this, like a room that is almost clinically sort of perfect, or someone with sort of alarmingly good teeth. It's slightly off-putting. I actually use this in the entire video series. I don't use a completely in-tune piano. See this little button here? I have an out-of-tune button on this particular piano, which is the Pianotech piano, where I can move into really out of tune or perfectly in tune. And I always go slightly there. And I've always found whenever I play tracks which have got the slightly out of tune piano, everyone finds it more appealing. The imperfection is sort of tastier in some way. So just because you could do something doesn't mean you should do something. My favourite painting by the French painter Degas is not finished. I prefer it to all his finished paintings. And he would have been appalled probably at that thought. So maybe the artist doesn't always know how to stop. That's why having a producer can sometimes help, or having a collaborator, or having a deadline, which is our next subject.
think deadlines and things are really, really important, and realistic deadlines. And the problem about self-imposed deadlines are that you can sort of, but if it's someone else giving you a deadline, that's always a bit more, that's always more severe. So yeah, I think deadlines are really important. But also I think part of that process saying, I'm going to work on this, you know intuitively you've got to work on it. If you follow your gut instinct, your intuition, go, this needs working on, I'm going to have this finished by lunchtime. Yeah, do it. I think that's really important.
But in terms of finishing projects, deadlines are usually helpful. I tend to overbook myself, and so it's really easy to say like, oh yeah, it's not due till June, I have so much time, whatever. And then I remember, wait, it takes me so long to arrange, and there's so much creative output that goes into it that I don't know how soon I'm going to be able to recover from that output to be able to work on the next project, you know? And so deadlines overall are helpful, because that at least forces me to actually sit down and work on it.
As my life has got busier and busier, because I'm doing all sorts of other things, politics and activism of various kinds, the time I have to work comes into rather shorter pieces. So I think, oh, Jesus, I've only got 45 minutes before I've got another meeting. And it's very interesting how the pressure of a very short amount of time forces you to just discard some of the options.
So yes, sort of just getting on with it, whether it's a self-imposed deadline or someone else's deadline, can really help in a really sort of practical way. Just remember that sitting on something, sitting on your own track, there's always that danger that by procrastinating, your own track, as you move on, becomes kind of irrelevant to you. Maybe you've changed the sort of genre that you're working in over the years, and it feels a bit out of date for you, or it's a particular lyric that means something particular to you, and you start to feel disconnected from it. So striking while the iron's hot, imposing that sort of sense of deadline on yourself while it feels fresh and the idea feels important to you is a really good idea. But it's multiple strategies, isn't it, guys? It could be that you need to just go bam, 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 finish. It could be that you need to take a break. Not do more work, but just take a break from the track that, in order to hear it in a new way. Every single musician that I've interviewed has talked about this as being an important thing.
For me, it really is just giving the piece space and allowing it to breathe, allowing it to fester wherever it may exist, allowing myself to be occupied with different things, whether that be another arrangement that I'm working on musically, another project I'm working on, or just reading a book, taking a walk, eating, making a nice dinner, whatever it might be, just giving myself something other than that specific project to do. And so when I go back to it, 1 or 2 days later, and having heard it, and even hearing the things that I might have been unsure about in the moment, it's half of the time it's like, oh, no, this is good. This works. I'm happy with this. So when I come back to it, it is fully with completely fresh ears.
Self-sabotage. Fear can really be a part of this process of not finishing it. Let's not pretend that isn't the case. Everyone's got an anxiety about wondering how their thing that they put out there is going to be received. But you can also, in a bad way, use it as a way of tripping yourself up. In other words, you don't finish something because you're worried about what might happen. And then before you know it, you procrastinated, and then the moment has passed and you go, oh, maybe I won't put it out there anyway. And actually you've just tripped yourself up. So as you can tell, I'm definitely not a qualified psychotherapist, but I am going to say, and we made a whole video on this process that we call Where's Your Head At? That fear is not something that you have to pretend isn't there. It's something that you can harness, you can know about yourself and use as a way of sort of shaping your creative process. So don't pretend it doesn't exist, but don't use it as an excuse. Feedback. Okay, so we have already done a video on feedback more generally about how to deal with getting critiques from colleagues, people who are commissioning stuff, friends, and so on to help you in the process of finishing or making your music. But here I want to talk about it more in terms of finishing your track. So the first thing to be aware is if you're playing a track to someone which is, in its ending stages, is that sometimes people feel a kind of duty to feedback. You play them something and say, oh, I better kind of say something. And so they say oh, I wasn't sure about the ending or whatever. They say a remark, and then you can obsess about that thing, whereas really they were just saying it for something to say because they feel like they should, rather than saying, yeah, it's great, and then stop talking. So that's one thing. And the second thing is more of a bit of advice. It's something that I've found useful, is to not tell people that a track is finished or unfinished. Just play them the track, and then they can decide whether it's finished or not finished. It stops them from presuming that they have to say something, because they might just say, I love it.
If there is something that I'm just so unsure about, then I will send it to my mentors or to someone who I trust musically and get their feedback on it, just to, one, make sure that I'm not going crazy, but two, half of the time, something that I feel good about but think it could be better, they're like, no, it's good. Don't change a thing. Like, they love the thing that you worked on, you know? So it's just a matter of letting go, letting things be, and trusting that you have the skill, that you have the talent, that whatever you're doing now, it's gonna work.
So it's returning back to this point that I made earlier. Sometimes the artist doesn't actually know the best about their own track. They're bothered by something, but it doesn't bother anyone else. Once again, getting a perspective, a different perspective, not your I'm in the thick of it perspective, is the solution. Screwdrivering. We've mentioned screwdrivering so many times in these videos. It's Brian Eno's concept of where you thinking so much about the detail that you forget about the whole. I mean, it is the enemy of finishing things, because you could dust your house or your apartment forever and never stop. And there's something about the finishing process when you're doing mastering or just doing those tiny adjustments. You're in this stage of making the tiniest little improvements to your track. And so it is really tempting to not be able to get that wider view. Let's talk about some other ways of getting a wider view. Don't look at the screen. I really want to recommend this piece of advice to you. And I'm amazed when I've spoken to young musicians and they've got a problem with a track, and then I say, have you actually listened to it without looking at the DAW project? And they haven't. And it's the easiest way to get a sense of perspective, to really hear for yourself what's going on. I would personally recommend bouncing out a stereo file of the track, so you can't be tempted to just press stop and just go, oh, I'm just going to take a look at this. I actually have a completely different set of speakers at the back of my room, so I can turn my screen off and just listen and not look. There's another element to this, that when you're looking at your screen with all your coloured blocks and your little arrow moving across it, you're actually doing something which an audience never is. An audience isn't watching this arrow moving going, oh, something amazing is going to happen when we get to the red bit. And oh, here we go, and bang, like that. A real listener isn't doing that, and you're sort of not testing the music. You're using your visuals to help you. You will hear it completely in a completely different way if you just take that visual component out of it. Find the right context. If you're writing a clubby piece of music, then if you can, try and play it on a club sound system, or actually with people dancing to it would be best. But if you can't manage that, then at least listen to it loud on a system with enough bass, and the opposite. If you're doing a really backgroundy piece of music, don't listen to it too loud. You know, you might need to turn it up loud when you're working on the detail, but when you're doing a listen through, listen to it at the appropriate level. Volume has a massive impact on how you hear things. And other things about context, if you're writing, a piece for picture, or proposing a demo for picture, let's say it's a horror vibe, then put it up against a horror picture and see how it feels to you. It will give you the sort of the right context. It's so easy to get tricked by what you're hearing. Change your location. So every mix engineer will tell you that this is the thing that you have to do. And that is true, that from a mix point of view, listening in your car or on your home system or someone else's system is just always a good idea. You get a sense of whether the vocal's too loud and those kind of things. But it's not just that. It's also what I was talking about before, that you're not tempted to change anything. As soon as you're elsewhere, if you're sitting in a car listening to your track, you can't do anything with it. You have to listen to it in one take. Just listen to the whole thing through. And once again, you're getting the real context. That's what a real listener does. They sit and they listen. And if you're lucky, they don't press stop. They go all the way through the track. So you're trying to replicate that feeling of what it actually feels like as a listener to hear something out in the real world. Start again. Okay, that might seem like a rather depressing statement. Isn't that a failure? I don't think so. I've just watched the Beatles, that documentary Get Back, where they play like dozens and dozens of versions of the same song. They didn't see it as a failure. They were just trying to get the right take. Now, it was easier in the, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or those kind of bands. If you felt like a track wasn't working, you were all playing live, the track's only 3 minutes long, it only takes you 3 minutes to do another version of it, doesn't it? So I'm not pretending that it's a trivial thing to start again, but sometimes it is the right thing. And I don't mean wiping some elements of your track away, although you could try that. What I mean is just start new tempo, new samples, just start from scratch. If it's really bugging you, the problem, and it might be that you remake that track in a better way, or it could be that you just find an interesting new direction. But either way, you're not getting stuck in this sort of paralysis of going, oh, is it finished? Is it not finished? Could even be that you return to that original idea and go, no, actually, it was actually finished all along. Are you a perfectionist? I think the word perfectionism is such a confusing word. That you hear of a lot of great musicians being described as perfectionists, and yet they're releasing things. I mean, and there's usually things that could be better about them. There's some little thing that could be from a technical point of view improved, but they've released these tracks. So maybe they're not perfectionists, or is that what perfectionism is? Is knowing when something is just sufficiently tasty and a wabi-sabi, that it's the perfect time to release it. So yeah, it's a really tricky word, but however you think about it, I think the important thing is to not use it as an excuse for not finishing, to not say to yourself, oh, the reason why I haven't finished the track is because I'm a perfectionist. Think about it, all those artists that you love who have been called a perfectionist, well, they managed to stop working on this track that they could have kept working on forever. They were able to say, it's done. I'm ready to do the next thing. So maybe you should too. It's never too late. Another form of self-sabotage is saying, oh, the moment has passed. I'm just going to leave it. It's gone. And maybe not. It could be that piece just hasn't found its moment yet. It wasn't, and you can put it in the bottom drawer, pull it out months, years later, and actually it's there, it's done. It just needed another context, another moment to be the right time to release it.
Yeah, the longest something's been on my desk that I've been working on, actually, I just released it on my third solo album. And I actually wrote the piano melody, the main bit of this song on the piano in 2004. I just continued to evolve and rework it. And I'm like, okay, it's time for you to be released into the world. And sure, 2004 to 2019, I think that takes the cake for the longest, the longest idea.
Like fine wine.
Yes, exactly. It came to its peak time and it needed to be shared.
A lot of music is about practice, making it or playing an instrument or singing, but so is finishing. If you want to get good at something, practice doing it. You might need to practice it multiple times, finishing many, many things, and that will start to hone your skills for knowing when something is finished.
It's a little bit like being an athlete, I think, where you don't just wait until the big race to run. You run every day. I work every day. And I keep toned, I suppose.
So finishing a track, a problem for maybe all of us at different points in our careers or different points in a particular track's life. Hope that's given you some strategies for thinking about it and making that anxiety of finishing that little bit easier.